Welcome to our viewers on MyTV8 and NaplesNews.com. I'm Jeff Lytle from the Naples and Bonita Daily News. For the next half hour, we'll get caught up on a lot of issues in Washington and around the world. Don't miss this program. Our guest is one of the representatives in the U.S. House for Collier County. Mario Diaz-Balart represents Eastern Collier and Miami-Dade and just a little tiny piece of Monroe County. Welcome, welcome back. Thanks for your time, sir.
Good to see you again.
The big issue, Cuba. We're taping on Wednesday morning. President Barack Obama has lifted some of the travel and the sending money restrictions to Cuba. You are really honked about that. The question is, if it appears to be good for at least some of the people in Cuba, and that the Castro regime is only a matter of time before it goes. So my question to you is, what is wrong with starting to improve relations with Cuba and its people now, because it appears to be a fait accompli, it's coming anyway?
Well, by the way, first, thanks for this opportunity. It's been a few months, I guess, since we've done this, and
good to see
so way too long. There's a couple of reasons why I think it's a pretty bad move. Number one is he's giving these the President Obama has given these concessions to the Castro regime, that state sponsor of terrorism, in exchange for what? For nothing. They are unilateral concessions to a terrorist group, a state sponsor of terrorism, asking absolutely nothing, not one iota, not even asking for anything in return, which, frankly, to me makes no sense. The president himself, when he was sworn in, he said, and I'm paraphrasing it, but to those who loosen their hands of tyranny, we will extend a hand. Here, the president has given unilateral concessions to not just a tyranny, which it is, but a state sponsor of terrorism, a regime that has killed numerous Americans. 12 years ago, shot down 2 American airplanes in international airspace, asking not one iota, not even pretending to ask anything in return. That makes no sense.
But if this is going to help reunite families, I mean, people, your constituents, and get more money from the United States, from the family members, to the family members in Cuba, without having to go through third countries and all that rigmarole, and if it's going to open up communication business between America and Cuba, cell phone sales, etc., cell phone service, beyond the point you just mentioned, where is the harm?
Well, the harm is, by the way, it's not going to help the Cuban people, because the regime says it themselves, that they're not going to open up, they're not going to allow any further freedoms. They say that every single day. So I think it's an illusion.
But the people will be able to spend the money.
Well, except that, here's the problem, Jeff. A couple of facts. Number one is that the largest provider of humanitarian aid to the Cuban people is the United States. By the way, more than the rest of the world combined. So the aid from the United States, humanitarian aid, is already going to the Cuban people.
But you don't mean the United States government, you mean no, private entities.
Absolutely, mostly Cuban Americans. Right. Mostly Cuban Americans helping relatives and friends and neighborhoods, etc.
So we're already helping.
Yeah, well, more than the rest of the world combined, yes, number one. But what you don't want to do is have that money go to the regime. You want to limit it as much as possible from going to the regime. The regime skims and milks and takes a big chunk of that money. So that's why you want to limit it to, for example, immediate family as much as possible, so that you don't have groups out there as business entities sending cash to the regime, which is exactly what used to happen before the previous administration tightened some of those areas.
How does the regime know that somebody in Cuba has gotten an envelope with $100 in it?
Because the regime decides who goes.
Who goes where?
Who travels to Cuba. People can't just go to Cuba, because when the United States says, as the President Obama has said, they're going to allow now more Cuban Americans to visit the island, it's not like they can just show up. The Cuban regime decides who shows up, who doesn't show up.
Does the regime also know who gets mail and who gets...
Yes. Absolutely.
Western Union?
Absolutely.
Okay. Absolutely.
It's not only that. Look, every single hotel, every single tourist attraction, every single facility where foreigners go to is run and controlled directly by the military. So every dollar or euro that is spent in Cuba goes directly to the military, which is why the number one issue that that terrorist regime has been pushing for is precisely what President Obama has given them, asking nothing in return. This has been a huge gift to the Castro brothers, asking nothing in return. At a time, by the way, and you're absolutely right, when both Castro brothers are, you know, one is very sick, very ill, is ailing, and will die sooner than later, and the other one is not doing much better. So here's the question. Why do you want to unilaterally give hundreds of millions of dollars to that regime, asking nothing in return? The entire debate can be summed up in two sides. One side says, let's give that regime unilaterally what it wants, you know, billions of dollars, asking nothing in return, and they'll become good guys. That's what President Obama has just started doing. The other side says, let's condition what the billions of dollars on just three things. Allow for some basic freedoms, including freedom of the press, which is essential, labor unions, political parties, free every single political prisoner, and start the process towards a democratic transition. Then all the sanctions go away. Is that too much to ask?
If some other people with Cuban heritage who I've talked to were right here, right now, they would say to you, what you're telling us is the old way of thinking. We've heard that many, many times before. It's time to get past that and to move on to a new day.
Sure, that's what people used to say when they wanted to do business with the apartheid regime in South Africa. It's time to just, you know, start doing business with the apartheid regime in South Africa. And by the way, it's going to help the unfortunate blacks. It was the same attitude of those who wanted to do business and did business with Hitler and supported that fascist, murderous regime, and actually supported it even until the truth came out in many, many cases. Because, you know, what the heck, let's just do business with them because there's a buck to be made. It's the same attitude that some of our strong allies like the French and others have with other state sponsors of terrorism like Iran. The reality is this. Look, should the United States have a policy of helping the independent civil society, the freedom fighters who are peacefully trying to achieve democracy, should you demand the freeing of political prisoners? Look, the Havels and the Mandelas of Cuba are in prison there right now. The heroes are in prison right now. Should the United States not be demanding that those people be freed at least before we unilaterally give concessions?